Hey guys, welcome back. It's Ripe again, back with more homeowner association stories. In this video, a stranger claims that he bought my paid-off house, saying that the HOA sold it to him for cheap. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one starts like this. I will start this off by saying that I'm most certainly grateful that I'm in a position where I've been able to fully pay off my mortgage, especially in the current housing market. I am 35 and live with my wife in a fairly nice area where, as I've mentioned, we have been able to pay off our mortgage in full. Due to us both receiving decent promotions a few years ago, we even managed to pay it off a few years in advance of the planned end date, something we are very proud about. It took us 15 years to pay off the mortgage, and in the first years we did have some help from family, but now we can relax. However, during these 15 years, unbeknownst to us, our property fell under an HOA area nearby. By nearby, I mean there are around 5 streets in this HOA, all of which are one bend around the corner from our house. So if you looked on a map, there are 5 streets neatly lined up, and it's very obvious that they are all in an HOA. You would not think one random house around the corner is also part of it, would you? Well, for the entirety of these 15 years, we did not hear anything from them. No letters that we hadn't paid our HOA fees, neither anyone coming wrong angry that our house didn't fit with their aesthetic or guidelines, probably because nobody on those 5 streets had a clue either. One afternoon though, I received a call on the landline, strange as nobody really uses that anymore, and the man answered and asked, "Hello? Is this OP residence?" "Yes it is, how can I help you?" I asked, assuming this was a cold call. And by the way, Ripe stars, I hate those. Also, how many of you still have a landline? I'm curious, let me know in the comments. Here in Thailand, it's apparently not a thing anymore. I don't know a single person here that has that. Although in Europe, I think it's still pretty common. "Oh well, I've bought this house, and when I drove by earlier, it looks like you're still occupying it. I was told you would have moved out 2 weeks ago." I was silent for a moment. What on earth are you on about? We own this house in its entirety and just paid off the mortgage. I hung up after that, thinking it must have been a prank call, but after worrying for most of the day, I decided to go down to the county courthouse and investigate. They pulled up the records of my address, and to my horror, it turned out the man was right. He had bought the house. He also informed me that it was sold for $200,000, which is significantly lower than the property's worth. "From who?" I asked, flabbergasted. "Well, it says here that your property was foreclosed on due to unpaid HOA fees." Sorry? I'm not even in an HOA area. That's just what it says here. I think it would be wise to contact whatever HOA this is. I will write down their contacts. I was furious, but at the same time sure that it was just some sort of mistake, maybe some sort of automated process and nobody had checked what was going on. Or maybe they had done this to the wrong house by accident. So then I drove over to the HOA office and walked in to explain the situation, handing over the documents that the courthouse had copied for me. "Oh yes, this house was foreclosed the other week," the woman behind the desk answered, pushing the papers back towards me with her long nails before turning back to her work. "Why?" I demanded. She sighed and turned back. "Because you haven't been paying your HOA fees for the past 15 years. "I'm not part of the HOA. The woman laughed slightly. "I think you will find out you are. Were the hundreds of letters informing you of your fees not enough proof?" "I haven't gotten any letters." "Yeah, sure you haven't, and you weren't able to hear any of the voicemails either?" she asked with a roll of her eyes. "There have been no calls or no mail." I really think this is all just some big mistake. "Nope, no mistake. You should have moved out weeks ago. We will get the police involved if you're not out by tomorrow." "This is not ending here," I replied and walked out. I went to bed that night absolutely furious. I told my wife everything and she had a similar stance on the situation. We decided that the next day we would seek out a lawyer and get their opinion on the matter. So the following day we both called off work and headed to a law firm and ended up sitting across from someone who specializes in HOA disputes. The lawyer did some digging online and found that this HOA had some significant flaws. Everything just seems done wrong. There's hundreds of complaints on here about data breaches and all sorts of stuff. The lawyer drawled as he kept digging, and when I look up the online deeds and foreclosures for your house, there doesn't seem to be nearly any proof that significant notifications were given. "That's good, right?" my wife asked. "For your case, yes. If all goes well, this should be a fairly easy case to win. It'll just be tedious and stressful in the meantime. I will contact the buyer's attorney to let them know what is happening, and then they should be awaiting a court verdict before the man can move in." While at the office, we filed a lawsuit against the HOA and had it sent out challenging the foreclosure and selling of our home. We also ended up ranting about the situation online. I know, maybe not the best decision, but we figured, why not? Sometimes ranting is the best therapy, and in this case it was, as the traction our story gained was insane. Some people were talking about similar stories. It seems most HOAs are rather disliked, others offering support and encouragement. All in all, most people were astonished at the more than questionable ongoings of this HOA and wondering in what world they thought they could do this. A day later we answered the door to another person representing the HOA. She had a lanyard on indicating as much. "Hello?" I asked. Hello. We have recently been made aware that the situation with your home has become rather public. It is upsetting members of the HOA and we wish for you to remove it." "So you wrongfully foreclosed my house and you are mad at me for posting about it?" "Well, not exactly. We just think we should handle things privately, okay? We will be handling things when we see you in court." I made a move to shut the door, but they put their foot in the way. Well, we do believe we could solve this on a more low-key level. The court hearing will be broadcast and filmed, of course, and instead we could just sit down like adults and speak about this. When would you like to come back down to the office? Why haven't you ever bothered to come over and speak to us before? I asked, kicking her foot out of the door and slamming it. "See you in court." A few weeks later, the court hearing was taking place. The man who had bought the house was there and was apologizing for all of the chaos, as he had no idea any of this had taken place and thought that he had simply gotten a great deal on the house. We of course didn't blame him at all. "Now you claim that the HOA has sent hundreds if not thousands of notices over the past 15 years to the residents, informing them of their outstanding fees," the judge asked the HOA representative, the same woman who had been at the desk when we went over. "Yes, that is correct. The fee total was $200K, so after the endless notifications we were forced to sell the house for that amount." Putting aside the fact that that is an obscene amount of money to owe an HOA, you must be aware that they own that house, right? Where are your statements that you have the right to sell it? Well, we took their silence as answer enough, that they understood the consequences and we had explained it in each and every letter what would happen. "Well, there's no evidence of any letters being sent nor calls," the judge stated. "Seems like I did not even need a lawyer for this." "Well, I'm certain they have been sent." The judge took a moment to scan through all the documents. "Well, without sufficient evidence to support your claims, I'm going to have to rule in favor of the plaintiff in this instance. Also, the HOA will be charged a sum of $300,000 for the emotional distress and financial hardship of the couple having to hold back from work temporarily." There was some slight back and forth after that between the HOA representative, who obviously paled at the amount. Me and my wife were ecstatic. All we wanted was the house, but that was even better. And of course the judge ordered for the property to be wholly returned to our names and for the sale to be reversed. The man figured that would be the outcome and the three of us decided to go out for drinks after that. On us, of course. And yeah, right, stars, I'm so happy that OP got his house back and then some more. That is how to beat an HOA. And by the way, if you enjoy the HOA stories, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my daily uploads and all the HOA stories. The next one is a car malicious compliance story. So this took place 8 years ago when I was buying my first new car. Not just a new to me car, I spent a good amount of time researching the options available, both in terms of other models from other manufacturers and option packages on the car in which I was most interested. So I knew exactly what I wanted coming in the door. In 2014, car dealer websites had not quite gotten to the level of borderline bait and switch trickery you see these days, so if a dealer's website said they had a particular car on the lot at a particular price, they almost certainly did. There were several in the region that matched what I was looking for, one specifically at my existing dealership. This was not a small dealership, it was one of the largest in the Northern Virginia area for this particular brand. I had a reasonably good experience with their service department overall and figured I would give their sales department a chance to shine. That was my first mistake. I showed up on a Wednesday after work. It was early June, so with the mercury being in the upper 90s, I was dressed in a comfortable but still very presentable combination of a polo shirt and khaki shorts. When I entered the sales side of the dealership, I could see what appeared to be all the salespeople in a conference room laughing and joking while taking scissors to the tie of one of the men present. Later I found out that was a rite of passage after making your first sale. I waited around for a minute or two as the conference room had glass walls and it would be impossible not to notice me as I'm not exactly a small fellow at 6 feet 6 inches tall. When no one came out to greet me, I went up to the receptionist desk and said, "Hi, I'm interested in model of car and there's one in stock I would like to see." Her response without even looking up from her phone was, "Okay, I stood there for another 20 seconds or so and then politely asked, would someone be able to show me that car? This finally prompted her to look up from her phone. She looked me up and down, scoffed a bit and said she would go and get someone. I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, hoping that things would turn around. That was my second mistake. The receptionist came back with what looked like the youngest, most wet behind the ears salesperson she could find, as evidently I was not worth the time of the more experienced folks. I explained that I was interested in a car that their website said they had in stock and provided him with the printout showing the stock number, price and all other pertinent details. It took him a while to find the car on the lot, but after a brief test drive I knew it was what I wanted and began the sales process. I had a trade-in which had been primarily serviced by them and for which I already had written an offer from CarMax, so I knew how much I should receive for it. He quoted me just over half of that figure. When I pointed out that I could get several thousand more by taking it to the CarMax just up the road and had a written offer from them for that specific amount, he went and got his sales manager, who offered to drive me there and pick me up afterwards, but that they wouldn't match what CarMax offered. I was a bit surprised that they didn't want a nice used car to sell for themselves, 6 years old, top of the line, reasonable mileage and serviced by them specifically. But again, cut them more slack than they deserved. When we got to the price, things really fell apart. He quoted me a price that was several $1,000s higher than what they displayed on their website. When I showed him the printout again with a noticeably lower price, he looked to the sales manager for guidance. The sales manager immediately took the line that the price listed includes all available rebates and special offers and you may not qualify for all of them. I was now frustrated and showed them printouts from the other dealers in the area that had a similar price shown and said if they weren't willing to honor the price listed on their website, I would just go to the next closest dealer that had that model in stock at that price. His response sealed the deal for me. Go ahead, waste your time and go to the competing dealership. We won't hold it against you when you come back here. I told them, okay, thank you for your time. I'll go to the competing dealership, and got up to leave. No one stopped me and the receptionist said nothing as I walked past her out to the parking lot to drive to the other dealership. When I got to the competing dealership, it was already around 8 PM as I had spent a fair amount of time at the first dealership and Northern Virginia traffic has never been known for being reasonable. I had a salesperson approach me immediately upon entering the dealership and I explained, I've just come from first dealership and want to buy the particular model of the car. Both of you have that car in stock with the options I want. They wouldn't give it to me at the price shown on their website though. If you will, I'm ready to sign on the dotted line right now. The salesperson immediately took me to his office, verified that they had the car, and confirmed that yes, the price on their website was accurate and I could walk out the door with that price. We started the process and when we got to the trade-in, I further explained how the other dealership tried to lowball me on the trade. He said if I could produce a written offer from CarMax for the price I mentioned, they would match it. I gave him that paperwork and without any further discussion he agreed that they would match that and we moved on to financing. I hadn't gotten this far with the other dealer, but I had already lined up financing through my credit union. He asked if I'd be willing to see if his F&I guy could match or beat that figure. I agreed to let him try and he came back with a rate that was 50 BPS lower. Needless to say, I was already very happy with these people, but that definitely sealed the deal. Right as I was finishing the paperwork, the salesperson from the first dealer texted me to ask if they would give me the car at that price. I responded back that they would and I was finishing up the paperwork at that very moment and he immediately tried to call me and then texted me saying he would give it to me for $500 less. I responded to his text stating that I'd already signed the paperwork and he had lost the sale. Once the paperwork was complete, the exceptionally pleasant and helpful salesperson at my new dealership spent an additional half hour after the dealership had closed for the night running me through some of the features of the car and showing me how the infotainment system worked. This was completely above and beyond what I expected, as I thought I'd just be reading the 300-page user manual to figure it out on my own. I drove home that night with my shiny new car, a very happy camper. And then the next day I decided to rub a little salt in the wounds of the first dealership, so I drove there straight from the office. For context, I work in the banking industry and at that point it was still very much business formal dress. I showed up in my suit with my briefcase and had people falling all over themselves trying to help me, including the receptionist who clearly remembered who I was midway through me asking for the particular salesperson I dealt with the previous day. She offered me a seat and asked if I wanted some coffee while she went to get him, and I politely said, "No, thank you, I won't be here long." She somewhat quietly, sheepishly responded that she'd be back with that salesperson very shortly. There was a couple in the waiting area who seemed a bit displeased that they'd been waiting for a salesperson, but I got one the moment I walked in the door. No more than a minute later, the salesperson and his manager came out. The salesperson recognized me, with a look of defeat on his face, shook my hand and asked how I was today. Before I had a chance to respond, the sales manager spoke up to introduce himself as if I hadn't spent an hour and a half with him the previous day. After I reminded him that I was there yesterday and he had said it would be a waste of time to go to the competing dealer because they'd never give me the car I wanted at the price shown on their website, his demeanor very quickly pivoted back to the snotty, insolent person I dealt with the previous day. He proceeded to ask, "Well, did they?" with a bit of sneer. I said nothing but turned to the side and clicked the remote for my new car so the horn would give a few chirps. He said, "Good for you," in a rather curt tone and walked away, leaving the poor salesperson on his own. I shook that salesperson's hand, thanked him for his time, and turned around to leave. The receptionist spoke up as I walked past her and asked in a rather chipper voice if I needed any further assistance. I politely responded that no, the other dealership had provided me exactly what I needed and I was all set. To make things just that little bit better, as I passed a couple sitting in the waiting area, I saw them exchange looks with each other that seemed to say, "Perhaps we should go to the dealer I mentioned." I said nothing further. I had walked out of the building wearing the smile of a winner. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. I've been living in the same neighborhood for about 20 years. In that time, I've seen several HOA presidents come and go, each varying in likability and success. One of them was the worst by far, and she seemed to think that being HOA president gave her certain rights over other people. As if suddenly rules did not actually apply to her and she could wander around and do anything she wanted. The biggest of these things would be to trespass on people's properties. At first, she would do it under the guise of official business, claiming that trees needed to be inspected or there was an anonymous complaint about gutters. Anything she could make up in order to go where she wouldn't have normally been allowed to. The reasons for this were not always clear, but many times she was seen trying to peer into windows, so my guess is she was mostly just a nosy person, but harmless. When it came to my land in particular, I started to notice a pattern. I have a passion for gardening, and in my yard I have two separate sections for it. In one, I try and plant some vegetables to varying degrees of success. It's one of the newer hobbies, I'll admit, and there's a bit of a learning curve. The other section is where I grow my flowers, and that's the part I'm much better at. I have a beautiful array of roses and tulips that makes me very happy to tend to and see. I've had many neighbors over the years ask if I would sell them flowers for special occasions, but I always refused. They were never something I wanted to sell or give to other people, just something for myself to enjoy. My husband had his project in the shed and I had my garden. Shortly after the new HOA president started, things in my garden started to seem off. Things from flowers looking walked on to flat out being picked, vegetables uprooted and footprints in the dirt. Of course, there are sometimes animals, but it was clear this was all being done by a person. I wanted to keep an eye out despite my suspicion and found that I was correct. The HOA president kept wandering into my garden and picking things as she pleased. After the third time I saw her, I ended up going to talk to her. I was pretty blunt and just told her that it was not a community garden and it was on my property. She was not allowed to come into my yard or my garden. She especially did not have permission to pick and take what she wanted because nobody was allowed to do something like that. Even my own husband knew better than to go anywhere near them unless I was asking him for help with something. She did not agree with what I told her and instead claimed she had the right to do so. That the garden was part of the HOA and that meant it had to be open to the community. She also told me that as HOA president, she did not need permission to go onto my property, she could just do so at will. I was not gonna let this continue and decided the best course of action was to put up a fence around my garden. This way nobody could get into it and she would no longer be able to mess around and ruin things. I ended up picking a black iron fence because I felt like it overall fit with the style of my home. Only a day after it was put up, I had the HOA president in my face, screaming that I had no right to keep the garden away from anybody else. That I was clearly violating HOA laws and she was gonna take me to jail. She claimed that when she was finished with me, she was gonna own my garden and my home. I did not mess around and got a lawyer to defend me against the HOA president and her false claims. I was not sure exactly what part of the rules she was claiming I violated, since I never got any official letter in the mail or anything like that. Only a lawsuit. This meant we had to prepare for a bunch of different angles that she might have come at us with. The good news was that the rules seemed to be on our side more than hers. When it came to her going on my property without permission, she obviously had no right. It does state in the bylaws that the HOA president has the right to go onto properties to check issues that were raised to them. However, this can only be done with 72-hour notice and the reason for them coming. She had not done any of those things, so that reason for suing us would go out the window. The fence was a little trickier because I found out there was an entire section just on fencing. She might try and claim that the fence was not allowed because it was not approved in advance by the HOA. Reading deeper, we found that if it came to protecting property and not being used as a personal barrier, such as a property line or decor, then it did not require permission. We saw some other things in there, but I mentioned these two specifically because it ended up being what the HOA lawyers tried to use against me in court. The judge ruled that I had done nothing wrong, building my fence on my property and denying the HOA president access to my garden. I had won my case, but I was not done with her yet. I made it sound easy, but the entire process took about a year and a ton of money just to defend myself. I had a strong case to counter-sue her, and I was not gonna just let that go. She had been caught trespassing, stealing property, destroying property, harassing me, and putting me through the emotional distress of a lawsuit. When the HOA had their case destroyed, it was time for me to go on the offensive, and it didn't take long for them to become afraid. I had pictures showing the damage she had done, as well as her claims of having a right to be in the garden. Some of the statements taken directly from her lawsuit against me. That meant she could not turn around and say something else, or she would be arrested for lying in court. I showed off the pictures of the destroyed flowers and stories of how long it took me to grow them. That I had asked her to stop and she refused, harassing me that she could do anything she wanted. Plus talking of the stress of a year-long lawsuit that did not need to happen because she must have known I did not break any rules. I won my countersuit against her and the HOA owed me a chunk of money. Most of it went to my lawyer and the rest was just enough for me to get my garden back on track. About 2 months later, she stepped down from her position, after other neighbors threatened to also sue for trespassing. To my knowledge, she was the shortest acting HOA president in my time living in this neighborhood. Like I said before, we had some not likable ones in the past, but she had beat all of them by a long shot. I hope what she did is a lesson to others that want to take the position that they cannot just do anything they want, and if they try, somebody living there is not gonna let them get away with it. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you again tomorrow.